In this video, we are going to talk about the tangent and tangent inverse function. We will graph and discuss all the properties of tangent and tangent inverse x functions. So let's start with tangent function. As you can see, this is my x-axis and this is y-axis. This point is the origin. The points that I'm considering on the right of origin is pi over 2, pi, and 3 pi over 2. And the points that I'm considering on the left of origin is this point negative pi over 2, negative pi, and negative 3 pi over 2. You can consider any other point that you like to. So there is no restriction for like not considering more points. So you're free to. Let's graph a function of tangent. Before we graph the function, what I'm going to do, I'm going to draw a vertical line at all the points that I'm considering on the x-axis. So these are my vertical lines that I have on the x-axis. Now let's graph tangent function. So if I graph the tangent function, this will be the graph of my tangent function. As you can see, the value of tangent is 0 at x equals to 0, and the value of tangent at pi over 2 is infinity, because the curve and this line, they never intersect each other. So technically the point here is the tangent function does not have a defined value at the multiple of pi over 2. So the domain of tangent function is all the values on the real number except the multiple of pi over 2. And range is from negative infinity to positive infinity. It simply means that tangent can have any value from negative infinity to positive infinity. And the periodicity of tangent function is pi, because tangent function repeat itself at an interval of pi. So as you can see, the difference between this point and this point is pi, and you get exactly the same graph, this one like this, and if you go the other way, you will get exactly the same thing. So the periodicity of tangent function is pi. Now let's talk about some more properties of tangent function. So this is my first quadrant, this is my second quadrant, this is my third quadrant and fourth quadrant. We start here at 0 and go all the way to pi over 2 in first quadrant, from pi over 2 to pi in the second quadrant, from pi to 3 pi over 2 in the third quadrant, and from 3 pi over 2 to 2 pi. The value of tangent is positive in the first quadrant, and the value varies from 0 to infinity. Value of tangent is negative in second quadrant, and the value varies from infinity to 0. The value of tangent is positive in third quadrant, and the value varies from 0 to negative infinity. And value of tangent is negative in fourth quadrant, and the value varies from negative infinity to 0. Now let's talk about the function of tan inverse x. As you can see, this is my x-axis and this is the y-axis. This point is my origin. The values that I'm considering on the positive y-axis is pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. For some reason this 3 pi over 2 is over here. It should be over here, so apologies for that. The value on the negative y-axis is negative pi over 2 and negative pi. So these are the values that I'm considering for the y-axis. Now I'm going to draw a horizontal line at pi over 2, and then at 3 pi over 2, and below over here at negative pi over 2. So as you can see, my horizontal lines are at the multiple of pi over 2. So now it's time for us to graph the tangent inverse function. So if we graph the tangent inverse function, we will get this kind of graph. Now let's talk about the domain and range of tangent inverse function. So as you can see, the domain of tangent inverse function is any value on the number line. So that is basically all the values from negative infinity to positive infinity. And the range for tangent inverse function is negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. If you consider a branch of tangent inverse function between this range, technically between line negative pi over 2 and pi over 2, so technically this graph, so I'm using a different color now. So as you can see, the graph that I'm using this time is like with a red color. So if I consider only this graph for a tangent inverse function, then that part of the tangent inverse function is known as principal value branch. And the values that we consider for principal value branch is between the range from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2.